In a world with good watches, bad watches, and a whole lot of nit, how can a man survive? Insights, analysis, My Watches with Ben.
Welcome to My Watches with Ben, where I talk about watches that I own, or review them, and I also do score-based analysis of different watch types. That's what I'm starting to do today. Today, at long last, I'm doing the dress watches. And there are a ton of dress watches. Two-handers, like the Breguet 5157. Three-handers, like the Casio MTP 1095Q. Moon phases, like the Maine Lunar Classic. Jump hour watches, like the Chanel Monsieur. Regulators, like the Junghans Max Bill regulator. Single-handers, like the Slow-Mo 07. I like single-handers. Oddballs, like the MB&F Architect and the 7 Friday ME1/02. Wandering hour watches, like the Zarek Scrambler. Tourbillons, like the Siga Everest Summit. Skeleton watches, like the Jochen Benzinger Full Skeleton. Hot Horology, like the Marie Lacroix Masterpiece Triple Retrograde. Chiming watches, the flavor of the moment, like the Christopher Ward C1 Bel Canto that everybody knows. And the Gerald Genta Minute Repeater. Even chronographs, like the Parmigiani Fleurier Toric. In total, my spreadsheet has 1,690 watches right now, and that number will almost certainly grow as this project continues. When I start to get into some other types of watches. Yeah, this is the first video in what will be many months of videos on dress watches. And I'll probably put some other stuff in there to break it up, but I'm going to be doing dress watches for a while. And the first chunk to bite off, it's just the simple dress watches. The ones shown in the thumbnail, just the 2 and 3 handers. That's all I'm looking at. With this type, the fewer the complications, the better. There are around 900 of these simple dress watches, and there could be more. I'm sure I missed some ones, but I'm going to present the 900, and please let me know if I missed any. For these watches, I have meticulously gathered all the specifications of these watches, and I'm ready to start presenting the results to you. For the simple dress watches, I've divided the population into 6 price ranges. That's a lot. There's approximately 150 in each one. God willing, next week will be the first price range, the budget, under 200 bucks. Each price range is going to get its own standalone video, which rates all the watches in that price range and concludes with a top 10. So each video is going to have its own top 10, totally standalone video, and I will attempt to release these once a week. We'll see if I can keep up. It's okay if I don't. I will try to do that. We'll see how it goes. So that was the announcement of the overall project. The main purpose of the video today is to explain the scoring system for simple dress watches. Use timestamps if you want. We covered the announcement, the other parts of the video. Next, I'll give you a teaser of one good sleeper in each price range. Then I'll give you a few thoughts on my philosophy of what a dress watch is. And then finally, I'll dive into the details of that scoring system by explaining the scorecard top to bottom. Now for the teasers. Here's some well-scoring sleepers from each price range. Well, just one from each price range. All right, in the under 200 price range, this is the one I selected as a teaser. It's the Knot Small Second, only under 32 bucks. It's great size, 36 millimeters, only 6.5 thick. It's part of the reason for the good score here. Yeah, it's very simple, very elegant. I think this is a great dress watch. And I had never heard of the brand Knot before, so that's part of why I chose it. Let's go to the next price range. In the $200 to $400 price range, I selected the Daniel Wellington Marlin Linen. There's some more obscure watch brands, of course. I chose this one because Daniel Wellington is often kind of dismissed by watch guys. Oh, that's just a fashion brand. I mean, yeah, I guess it is a fashion brand, but their watches are pretty good for dress watches. And this is the best one they make, in my opinion, for a dress watch. Only 6 thick, crazy. Let's go to the next price range. For the $400 to $1,000 price range, I chose the Denison ALD Ghost. Really cool mother of pearl pattern on the dial. It's beautiful. It's a really cool case. The wrist presence is kind of equal to a 39 millimeter watch, so it's not crazy. It's kind of a short lug to lug though, only 37 lug to lug. That looks a little funny. But yeah, who's heard of Denison? I like what they did here with the text too. It's printed on the underside of the crystal. Really cool looking watch. And for the next price range, $1,000 to $2,400, chose the Pharaoh Paramount. Again, who's heard of Pharaoh? Really cool looking dial here. Nice kind of Art Deco-y numerals. And the dark black hands. It's very striking. Good size. To get a high score, you kind of have to have a good dress watch size, which is smaller than the other types of watches. I'll get into that more a little later. It's a hand winding watch. In the next price range, $2,400 to $10,000. I do call this luxury. I think an $8,000, $10,000 watch is a luxury watch. But the teaser I chose was the De Rijke & Company Capri. Very interesting shape here. It's curved crystal that goes across. It says Dutch crafted, aventurine dial. Really cool looking watch by a brand I had never heard of. There's lots of brands I'd never heard of in this series. It's a small one for sure. 33.6 presence. The watch on my wrist is a 33 millimeter. It's not crazy for a dress watch. It really isn't. It seems small by modern standards, but for a dress watch, it is totally appropriate. In the last price tier, over $10,000, I call it ultra luxury. It's $46,000 for this Quingan Pastoral 2. Totally handmade. The guy hand makes the movements even. It's just crazy expensive, really elegant looking watch. That's the teaser I chose. It's a little bit harder in this price range because most of the brands near the top are ones that you know of, but this is the teaser. So that concludes the teasers, and now I'm going to show you kind of some of the overall results. All right, so here's how the scores turned out for all the different price categories. And I do it on an American grading system. Green is a good grade. Yellow is kind of okay. Red is not passing in my class. And these are the percentages. 26% of the overall watches, the 900 watches, 26% have a good grade. Only a quarter of the watches, I think, are a good grade. Watches that I identify as kind of dressy. That's what's in the population. There are a lot of sport watches, and those are a big part of the red ones. They just don't score well, which was by design. I don't think sport watches are as good as a traditional dress watch for formal things. 33% were okay grade. You know, all these price tiers, except ultra luxury, have a clear spike at the C. At least that's the highest part at the C grade. We look over here, the budget price category is the tallest one that's in the not recommended. If I remember correctly, most of the watches in the budget price range are not recommended. But then you look at the ultra luxury one, most of these ones are recommended. The line for ultra luxury is so high over here compared to the other price ranges in the good grades. That was kind of expected. Spend a lot of money on a dress watch. It's going to be better. All right, let's talk about the philosophy. What is a dress watch? It's a simple timepiece that's suitable for formal events, where you're wearing a suit. Understated elegance, restrained beauty. It's pretty straightforward. Now, that doesn't mean you can only wear a dress watch to formal events. You can wear it wherever you want. But that's the DNA of the watch, is that it's suitable for formal events. That's a broad description. But practically speaking, what does that actually mean? So understated means minimal text, smaller size, simple format, and ideally no complications. And traditionally that meant no second hand. Traditionally, dress watch should not have a second hand. So I reward that. If they leave the second hand off, I think that improves the dress watch. The watch should not be distracting you when you're at a ball or an opera or whatever you're doing. You don't want your watch to be doing all this fancy stuff. And elegant means that precious metals are good. Gold is better than steel. Light dials are good too. That's just tradition for dress watches. I didn't make this up. That's how they traditionally are. They're white dials. If you look at the watches, most of them are white dial. There are not as many dark dial dress watches. Dark dials are okay. I'm just saying light dials are a little more preferred. Applied indexes are better than printed text. And one reason light dials are better is when you have silver hands on a white dial, or even gold hands on a white dial, it's lower contrast than when you have a black dial with gold hands or black dial with silver hands. The white is lower contrast, and that's generally what's preferred for dress watches. Applied indexes are better than printed text. It's more premium. So these factors of understated and being elegant, those are much more important than the protection. So very little of the score has anything to do with protection whatsoever. 30 meters water resistance is actually not that bad for a dress watch. And 30 meters is splash proof, but if you're at an opera or some sort of ceremony, award ceremony, or whatever you're going to, all you have to worry about is splashing some champagne on yourself or something. You know, you don't have the same types of hazards you do if you're some commando in the woods. And then, like, why is this important? Well, the lower water resistance you have, the thinner the watch. When you increase the water resistance, you have to increase the size. You have to screw down the case back instead of snapping it on. Stuff like that. All that increases the thickness of the watch. And for dress watches, you want them to be as thin as possible. So they slide under the cuff so that they look more elegant. That's what you want. So 30 meters is fine. 69% of the watches have 50 meters or less. So yeah, more than 2/3 of the watches are 50 meters or less water resistance. But now we're ready to go through the scorecards. All right, so I'm going to go through the scorecard top to bottom and just explain everything that goes into it. In one of these video series, I skipped this, and people were not pleased with that. So somebody likes that I do this. Here are the percentages for each of the kind of factors of the watch. You know, protection. Protection only gets 10%. I don't think protection is the most important thing for a dress watch, so it's a relatively small portion of the score. Dial aesthetics is 30%. External aesthetics is 23%. So taken together, just aesthetics, what the watch looks like, is more than half of the score. Practicality is the size, 27%, almost a third of the score. And then I have 10% allocated to subjective factors. This Cartier maxes that out. It gets the perfect elegant vibe, perfect brand strength. But yeah, now I'll go through the scorecard and show you what they all are. All right, starting at the top, I always like to list the price, the size, the diameter, the thickness. Here it says presence because on this particular watch, the diameter left to right is only 22 millimeters. That doesn't explain how this thing actually wears. So for square or rectangle watches, I convert the area of the rectangle to what the diameter of an equivalent area circle would be. And that's done with this formula here, the square root over the area divided by pi times 2 equals the diameter of an equivalent area circle, which in this case is 28.3. Anyway, this is the presence of the Cartier Tank Louis, around 28 millimeters presence, which is small. That's definitely small. We'll get into the scoring there. It's getting penalties for that, but we'll get to that later. Thickness, 6.4. Presence thing is relatively straightforward with circles and with rectangles. It gets more difficult with irregularly shaped watches, like this Yema. So I'm illustrating right here. A 39 millimeter circle is too small. There's more case material here outside that circle. It's bigger than a 39. You can't take a square either. Square would be equivalent to a 44 millimeter circle. That's way too big. And so what I do is I take a circle, I just increase it slightly until what I'm looking for here is I want the same amount of material outside the circle as there is missing from the inside of the circle over here. So I'm just trying to make a circle that does that. And that circle is 40.3 millimeters. So I'm saying the Yema has a presence of a 40.3. I think that's fair. It's only slightly bigger than 39. Obviously, if I did a square, that would be ridiculous. Another watch type where diameter is a little bit misleading are these sport watches that have gigantic wings, like these integrated sports watches. There's a ton of case area here that's outside the circle. I don't consider the lugs part of it, so you could say, here's the lug, but all this material here is outside the circle. A square, again, is way too big. That's overinflating it. So I kind of take a circle and try to imagine this area here and then having it made up over here. This gets closer to the truth. The Tissot PRX 35 millimeter wears closer to a 38 than it does a 35 because you've got all this extra stuff going on that you wouldn't have on a 35 millimeter watch. 35 millimeter watch would just be a circle with a couple lugs here. It'd be much smaller. So this is more like a 38. And just one more, I guess this is another cushion case. We already did cushion, but another way I can do cushions is I can take a square and just make it a little bit smaller and kind of, the material here match the material missing here, and just, you get a square. Panerai Radiomir 40 PRX. Okay, that's a typo. Anyway, it's a 40 millimeter left to right. It's not a square. Square would be like a 45. It's more like a 42 is what this thing wears like. And one other thing to mention, when the presence is calculated from, it's like a strict calculation, I say presence. When it's a little bit more vague, like this Yema thing, I'll say feel. So it's got a 48.3 millimeter feel to it. This is a little more art than science. I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of computer program you could like define the area or whatever. I just do it this way with the circle. I think that's close enough. I'm sure I beat that thing totally to death. So finally, we're at the first line of the scorecard. Sorry I went on all day about the presence thing. Got water resistance and magnetism. These are small penalties. It's not a huge difference. With other watch types, this was a much bigger factor. This one, it's just not that big a deal. All right, magnetism. A lot of the really fancy watches don't have any magnetism protection. Yeah, some of these really fancy Swiss watches, they prefer the traditional materials, so they don't necessarily have silicone or whatever. But basically, if there's no protection for magnetism, -2. It's like medium protection. You've got some sort of resistant to magnetism materials in your watch. It's a -1. And then if it's a silicone balance spring or a Faraday cage, something like that, you get a 0 for the points here. So there's 10 points, nothing is subtracted. This Cartier doesn't have any magnetism protection, so it's getting the -2. It's getting the -3 for the 30. That's how you get the 5 here. Here's a chart of the water resistance ratings of all the 900 watches. Like I said, most are 30 or 50. A lot of these 100 meter water resistance, I'm sure those are sport watches or something. 200 is as high as any of these things go. Next line's the crystal. And here it is. Sapphire with anti-reflective coating, in my opinion, is the best. Followed by sapphire, followed by acrylic. Acrylic has a little bit of charm to it, but it's going to get scratched and stuff. And that's followed by mineral. And then resin glass is the worst. All right, now we're on to dial aesthetics. Applied numerals, like I said before, are better than printed. It's actually a huge difference. Again, aesthetics is a much bigger part of the score, so these penalties are larger. Dial format, I think the ideal is just totally clean. We have some watches like this that have no indexes. They get a little bit of a bonus here. I think that's really cool. Hour batons is 0. That's what I have on this watch. They're just little batons. Arabic numerals is a little bit of a penalty. Romans are classier than Arabics, that sort of thing. Some Arabics just means there's like a 369 or something. Standard Arabics is when you have all 12. That's not ideal. There are some really classy looking watches that have all 12 Arabics on them. I think hour batons are more appropriate for a dress watch though. All right, the next one is contrast and whether there's lume or not. And contrast just basically means the dial and the hands and the indexes. Are they all light or I suppose all dark? Or is there a mix? And yeah, so the Chanel here, it's all light. When it's gold and white, I consider that low contrast. I'm not giving a penalty for gold hands on a white dial. I consider that fine for contrast purposes. But when you have blue hands, black indexes, that's high contrast on a light dial. Medium is basically just the indexes are dark, but the hands are light like the dial. It's kind of an in-between. If these hands were dark, I would give it high contrast. I do give a bonus to guilloche watches. That kind of overrides all this stuff. If there's a really cool guilloche pattern on there, that just gets a bonus, even if there is contrast involved, because I think the guilloche is worth it. I think it's really cool. Lume situation, you don't want lume on the dress watch. And I showed a couple examples. The Glasuta Original, this white paint on the hands cheapens it. And then you've got these little white dots around here. It would look so much better if they didn't have that. I don't understand. Same with this Alpina. The lume is not needed. You're not Jack Ryan timing when the bomb's going to go off or whatever in the dark. You don't need the lume on the hands at your opera or ball. You're not supposed to even be checking your watch at formal events anyway. But here are the scores for that. Okay, how much printing is on the dial? This is a big deal. And then also how prominent is the minute track? So I have some examples here of what I mean. I'm just trying to define terms so you understand. Sterile dial, I'm defining as anything that doesn't have written text. So I make an exception basically if there's a logo. This Parmigiani Fleurier, I'm considering it a sterile dial because there is no text on the dial whatsoever. They just have a logo. Some watches have nothing, and that's also sterile, but I'm considering this sterile for the purposes of scoring. Minimal printing, I consider 1 or 2 lines of text only. So Citizen Eco Drive, I consider that minimal printing. That's nice. The IWC, this has 3 lines. IWC Schaffhausen Swiss made. I consider that part of this. And so that is a -1. Rolex is famous for having 6 lines of text. So when you have that kind of stuff, I give you the extraneous text penalty. Even worse than extraneous text, I think, are these minute Arabics. Really takes away from the elegance of the watch. I know it's a deliberate design choice. I know they're being a little bit edgy or whatever. For simple dress watch, I think the simpler, the better. And yeah, these minute Arabics definitely get a penalty there. Shouldn't be on a dress watch. And the other thing is the minute track. And some watches have no minute track. That is the best. It looks really good. This watch on my wrist has no minute track. I know you can't see it. I know there's no way you can see this watch. Maybe I'll put up a picture of it. I don't know if I've taken any pictures. I don't wear this one because it needs to be serviced. Minimal marks, it's just like tiny little slashes. The thin railroad track, Patek Philippe, this is okay. It's not too crazy. There's some appeal to a railroad track, but not if it's too crazy. I mean, at this point on the Cartier, it's prominent. It's a prominent minute track. I think a dress watch should be more subtle than this. Although, I mean, Cartier Louis gets a 85. So it's scoring well. It's a good dress watch. But ideally, as a broad generalization, you want the minute track to be more subtle. Second hand, I mentioned before, ideal is to have no second hand. Small second, that's not quite as bad. A sweeping second, that's a big penalty. I have no regrets for making this -3. Maybe even make it a bigger penalty. The ticking seconds of a quartz, that gets a -4. That's even worse than the sweeping second. I mean, any second hand is going to get a penalty. Some are worse than others. Date. You shouldn't have a date on a watch, in my opinion. Big date is just more date, more stuff there on the dial. So that gets a bigger penalty. Pointer dates are pretty cool, especially some of them do them in a subdial or something. So that's not as bad. But the ideal is just no date for a simple dress watch. All right, next we get to crown sizes. And the difference between a small crown and a large crown is 3 points. The crown size is a little bit subjective. I could have made like a little square or something and made all the watches the same size and checked, definitively, does the crown fit in, which box does it fit in for large, medium, or small? I think it's more of a feel thing. This is definitely a large crown. This is a very large crown, but it has a cabochon. So that's kind of the trump card here. You have a cabochon, and I say, okay, that's good. It's a bonus to the watch, basically. Some crowns are actually recessed into the case. That's even better. It's even more streamlined. And then push-pull versus screw-down. Push-pull is better. Again, water resist. You're not diving with the watch. You don't need the screw-down. Locking lever. That's no good. Oh, the crown cover. I gave crown cover a bonus. I think there's only one watch that has it. It's the Cartier Ballon Bleu. That crown cover actually looks really good. So that one got a bonus. Oh, the locking lever, that only applies to a Panerai. I don't think anybody else has that. It does detract from the elegance of the watch to have some gigantic mechanism on the outside of it. All right, strap. There's a lot of straps listed. Alligator, like on this Cartier. It just says leather. Surely this is alligator. Yeah, cow leather is not going to look like this. So I should probably fix that. Get an 86 instead of an 85. But leather's the way to go with dress watches. You can't convince me otherwise, so leather is the best. Jubilee bracelet. Just any bracelet is going to get big penalties. Silicone's not as good either. Rubber. Nylon strap is not good. It's not the look for a dress watch. Obviously Zulu, NATO are bad too. And then pin buckle gets a -1. So I'm kind of mixing. On the fly adjust, that only applies to bracelet. No extension, that only applies to bracelet too. Deployant clasp only applies to straps. I know regular bracelets have a deployant clasp. I'm just explaining how I did the scoring. So if you have a leather strap and it has the deployant, that gets a bonus. Yeah, let's take a couple examples. A regular bracelet with no extension would be a -5 plus -2 equals -7. The Cartier, a watch with just a leather strap and a pin buckle, is a -1. So -1 versus -7. And there have to be minuses in the scoring system, or else you end up with scores that are 100 or plus, because some watches will just get bonuses left and right. You have to have some somewhere. And so, yeah, I know most of the watches just have a pin buckle, but that's one of the things that makes the scoring system all work. Okay, case material. I mentioned precious metals. This includes all kinds of stuff. Rose gold, pink gold, white gold, platinum, +1 bonus. Precious metals get a +1. If it's gold plated, that's pretty sweet too. There aren't very many gold-plated watches. There should be more, because that makes the watch a lot cheaper, but it still looks like gold. You still get the look. Grade 5 titanium is really nice. 904 steel gets a 1 point over the 316. I know it's got nickel in it and everything, which bothers some people, but it is a superior steel. It does cost a lot more. Gold PVD steel gets a bonus over regular steel, because again, the gold look is superior for dress watches. That's the decision I made when scoring all this stuff. You can see the other values there. And then case features is mostly the polish and stuff. I put in a few other things here, like garish design. If the watch just overall impression is super garish, I wanted to have a place to put a penalty, so I put that with the case. It's in external aesthetics. But when a watch has crown guards, that's not ideal. That's not great. The brushed case of a lot of these sports watches, that's a penalty too. Ideally, you want a polished case on your dress watch. That's the ideal. Engraving can be really impressive sometimes, so that gets a bonus. The reverso gets a bonus because you've got that cool little case trick you can do. So here you go. These are the values. Okay, now we're getting into area again. I talked about area a lot, but I'm going to talk about it some more. So we have the area and the lug to lug. So originally, I took kind of a hardcore stance on the sizes of the watches. I just put in values that kind of made sense intellectually. And then I started to see some weird things about it. And I started to look at watches, actually what they would look like on the wrist. And I realized that my penalties were way too much. So here's a little bit of a story. When I was about 40% complete scoring the watches, here's what my chart looked like. You know, the colors are different and everything. But anyway, I noticed the spike was at C-, not at C. This is something I was finding. And Series 4, that's, you know, I expect most of the watches to be pretty good at that price range, 1,000 to 2,400. And the spike was at C-. So that was a problem. The whole chart needed to be moved over. And I found out that the way I had tuned the sizes didn't really match reality. So I made adjustments to diameter, lug to lug, and thickness. And after I made these adjustments to diameter, you know, things moved over. Made the adjustments to lug to lug, they moved over. Made adjustments to thickness, it moved over. And I'll just show you kind of what I arrived at. So under this old scoring system, this Alonga and Zerna was breaking the system. The bonus was so huge here for the thickness. Thickness had to be dialed back. A lot of these things, they just had to be dialed back a little bit. Some of the things I was doing. I was severely penalizing large watches and super bonusing really thin watches and stuff. I just had to bring it more into the realm of sanity, recognizing what the watches actually were. You know, how big a difference is it between 7 and 8? It was crazy what I was doing before. So I essentially just took a bunch of watches and mocked them up on my wrist with their actual size. And these are good size watches. They all are. I was noticing like this one, this Kuoe was getting a -2. 2 points off for a thickness of 10. And that's silly. It shouldn't. That was crazy. And then this one was getting a +4 for the 6mm. That was way too much. So I changed that to 2 for the 6mm. It was too crazy. Like, yes, we want thin watches. 6mm, that was way too much of a bonus. Particularly over 7, because 7mm was a 2-point bonus. 6mm is a 4-point bonus. Like, yeah, it's impressive, but you don't need to go that crazy. The Mido, I think, is too big. So really, what the point of all this, me putting them on the wrist sort of thing, was to see visually, does this look too big for a dress watch? Yes, it does. 42mm watch looks too big. It's not -5 too big, it's a -3 too big now. So yeah, the old scores were on the left, the new ones are on the right. -6 for being too big for the Mido. -8 for the Bulgari, yeah, it's way too big. -6 for the Orient. The biggest penalty here is for that thickness. I think 12 is way too thick. I guess the other reason I wanted to show you the watches on the wrist is that I thought that like 33 was too small for a dress watch. I don't think it's too small for a dress watch anymore. So I changed that. The 33s are actually okay. It's hard to go too small for a dress watch for a man. You know, 28mm, sure, that's the lady's watch. I wanted to go traditional, and this Technos on my wrist, this is a traditional dress watch. So it shouldn't be getting some massive penalty for being too small. If you want a watch this small, if you're that kind of guy, that's appropriate. It's appropriate for a dress watch. Seiko scores really well here. The Bolton, also I was penalizing the Bolton. Look at it on the wrist. You know, it has a 32.7 presence, a smaller presence than this Technos, slightly. Ever so slightly smaller presence than the Technos. Why was it getting a -3 points for that? That was crazy. It's on the smaller size, but overall, this is a great size. It's a great size for a dress watch, so I had to tweak the scoring system. I'm sorry I talked about this stuff so much. I'm sure it was overkill. But here are the results. Here's the diameters. So from 33mm up to 39, that's what I consider to be a good window for a dress watch. 35 to 36 is really great. It even gets a bonus. But essentially outside of this, as you get bigger, you get penalties. As you get smaller, you get penalties. With obviously on the large size, the penalties are more severe. It's worse to be too big than too small for a dress watch. There aren't any watches this big. That's silly. Yeah, it only goes up to 49? We have a 49mm dress watch. That gets a -12. But again, yeah, here's the golden window with the bonus here between 35 and 36. It's just the overall population. What is the size? There's a lot of 40mm watches, 18%. I think that's too big. It's just a little too big. I'm not saying it's crazy. The way I originally set this up, I was saying 40 was a -3. Now I'm only saying -1. It's not crazy. It's just a little too big. And obviously the penalties increase as these go up. Lug to lug. This is another one that I had to look at pictures of watches on my wrist superimposed to realize what is a lug to lug that's too small. This lug to lug is too small here on the Technos. It's getting a -1. That's too small. All these ones that I said were too small. The Hellbros over here. That lug to lug is absurdly small. -2. I think that's way too small. This is a good lug to lug here with the Bolton. Even the Orient is not crazy. It's a little bit too big, the lug to lug. It's a little bit too big, but not too much. I just had to look at the actual watches to determine what made sense here. So here are the lug to lugs. I know people aren't as familiar with these as they are with diameters. These are the penalties. All right, thickness. I am giving big bonuses to ultra thin watches. They're still there. They're not as big as they were before. You get a +2 bonus if it's a 6mm watch, which makes sense. This one's 6.4, so it would get, I guess it would get a 2 because that rounds up to 6.5. It's a 2-point bonus for that. And the weight, it is under 68 grams, so it's getting a +1 here. Here are the weight penalties. In other videos, I had weight be so much of a bigger factor. I softened the impact of weight because you've got gold watches. Those are heavier. Those are the weight penalties. All right, movement. We're on to movements. And this one also, there's not huge penalties involved here. I've got the quartz movements up here. I've got the mechanical movements, automatics and hand winding movements. Both are mechanical. I don't differentiate score-wise between those two. And you've got the accuracy and the quality. Here's how it shakes out for these things. In-house mechanical movement, that's great. Quartz has much higher accuracy. That's how I did this. I wanted to make it more rational. The accuracy and the quality. Yeah, a regular quartz movement has low quality. An additional element to what you're seeing right here is over here with the second hand situation. So a quartz watch with no second hand, that's pretty darn good. I mean, the Cartier Tank is a quartz watch with no second hand. That's a pretty good movement choice, in my opinion. Even better would be a mechanical in-house movement. That would score better than a quartz watch with no second hand. Really what is awful is when you have the ticking second. So that has to be factored in here too. I just thought it was important to keep that in mind because a lot of these quartz watches have a second hand that's ticking. And so you may think, -2, well, that's really junk. Yeah, the main reason the quartz watch is junk is because of that ticking second. So that was located in a different spot. Believe me, the quartz watches don't do all that great. Like the budget price category is the worst scoring. So it all works out in the end. The mechanical ones do better than the quartz ones in general. Okay, so Seiko NH35 with a sweep seconds, that's a -6. Same as the quartz with the ticking seconds. So with the quartz, at least you get the accuracy. It's the NH35. I mean, a lot of times it comes with a date. NH35, you don't have that accuracy. Yeah, maybe these all should have been -1. Then things would be breaking the system even more. Then there'd be even more disparity between the low price range and the high price range. That's how I tuned it. Okay, now we're down to subjective. Brand strength. Brand strength, I'm giving 4 points. 4 points to brand strength. It's not the hugest deal in the world. It says 4 points, but you can get a 0. So it's almost like 5 points, but it's technically only 4 points that are added here. Let's see here. And I did this with watch charts. So if you go to watch charts, sort by popularity, they track primary and secondary sales of watches. And so they know what the hot watches are. Rolex is the hottest brand in watches, followed by Omega. Omega's second place. Seiko. And I put some little numbers here because the last time I looked at watch charts was maybe a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago. I can't remember precisely. These top 3 are still the top 3, same order. Some other things moved around, which I just thought it was a little interesting. Breitling has apparently lost some brand strength in the last year and a half. Same with Panerai. Swatch lost a lot of brand strength in the last year and a half. That's odd. With the Moon Swatch, you'd think that they would have gone up compared to other brands, but they did not. Grand Seiko gained. Patek Philippe has gained as well. Hard to think that Panerai used to be above Patek, but I guess, this is sales. So, yeah, Panerai, I guess, has more sales. Well, not anymore. Now Patek's higher. That was brand strength. Now vibe. And vibe is definitely subjective. I'll just show you how I did it. I did it methodically, but as I go through all the cards again, I'm going to do another logic check on this. If there are things that don't make any sense, I will correct them. But with the vibe, essentially what I did is I just took the overall impression of the watch. Is it extra classy? Is it just kind of okay, or it's a sport watch, or is it meh every day? And so the extra classy starts off with a 6, and then we add bonuses on top, or penalties, to get to the final score. So the Zen, it's sleek. It's extra classy and it's sleek, so it gets a 7. The Patek Philippe is sleek, it's also iconic, it's also fresh, in my opinion. So I gave it a 9. The FP Journe, it's fresh, iconic, has a great dial, and it's sleek. Actually, the Cartier should probably get a 9, not a 10. I need to update that. That's not scored correctly. Probably still gets 6 points, but yeah, should be a 9, not a 10. Then we've got penalties. Casio, it's a sport watch, so it starts off with a 5, and it's got 2 penalties. Bad finishing, and it's clunky, so it gets a 3. These kind of everyday watches, these two, I didn't really find issues with them. Well, maybe this 49, whatever it is, that should have bad finishing. That should be a 3. Some things get mixed bags. If it's a homage, you know what? I changed this. Yeah, sleek no longer applies. If it's a homage, so this should be a 3. Should be a 3, not a 4. Shouldn't have any bonus for the fact that they're copying somebody else. The poor name Parnas, that's bad. So we've got penalties. Oh, -2, -1. I think this should be a score of 2. Undercutting how meticulous I said I was. Anyway, that's how I did the vibe. I put the slide together and then I kind of ignored it as I did the things. I wanted to look at, I was just looking here and there. So yeah, this example of the Parnas is incorrectly scored. So that's the vibe. All these things add up to the total score. 10 points, you take away 6, you get 4. 30 points, you take away 6, you get 24. That's how these ones work. This one at the end, these are only addition. You don't take a 10 and subtract things. They're just addition. But all this stuff adds up to where it's a 100-point scale. Cartier gets a score of 85. I think we established maybe it's an 86 because it has an alligator leather strap rather than a cow leather strap. That was the scoring system. If you watched all this, thank you for watching. I know it's a little bit tedious. The results are much more interesting than digging through the analysis and how it was done. But if all goes according to plan, next week I'll have that first video, the budget price range. There's some cool watches in there. There's also a lot of funky stuff. There's a ton of Chinese watches. It's going to be a lot of Chinese stuff. But that's all I have for you. And as I do in all these videos, after I talk about the watches, I like to talk about the Bible. So that's what I'm going to do now. It's Bible time. All right, welcome to Bible time. I'm not a pastor or a trained biblical scholar. I just like sharing the Bible with other people. And today I'm finishing the series on the Hebrews 11 Hall of Faith. This is video number 23 in the Hall of Faith, covering Elijah. And this is the last one I'm doing. Today's passage is found in Hebrews 11, verse 37. It says, and the part that we're focusing on is where it says, they went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. And my study Bible identifies Elijah as the person referred to here. And there's a lot to say about Elijah. Let me start with his introduction. So Elisha is introduced in 1 Kings 17, verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. So Ahab was the king of Israel, and he did more evil than any of the kings before him. The Bible tells us that Ahab was married to Jezebel, and that he served Baal, even setting up an altar for Baal in a temple he built. That's found in 1 Kings 16, verses 29 through 33. And then right after that is the first one I read about. It just says, now Elisha the Tishbite. He just goes up to the king and says, there's going to be this huge drought. He just seems to come out of nowhere. There's no preamble, there's no explanation, no genealogy. As it says in Hebrews, he went around in sheepskins and goatskins. So he's not some grand looking guy. Continuing the story, in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 8, it says, the king asked them, what kind of man was it who came to meet you and told you this? They replied, he had a garment of hair and had a leather belt around his waist. The king said, that was Elijah the Tishbite. Just by his appearance, people knew him because he wore these animal skins. And after Elijah was taken up, people emulated that. They went about in sheepskins and stuff. Elijah's story contains a lot of supernatural events. I mean, he didn't die. That's probably the biggest one. He was taken up to heaven in a fiery whirlwind. But he certainly made an impression on the Jewish people. In the New Testament, in Luke 1, verse 17, Zechariah prophesied that his son John the Baptist would go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. So John the Baptist came in the spirit and power of Elijah. But what I'm going to do today with Elijah is just cover a few of these amazing events that happened. I'll give Kevin an overview of the amazing events. So we already covered the first event where Elijah called for a drought. He said, "Accept at my word," indicating he would say when the drought was over. Elijah was going to ask God to end the drought, and that would happen. So that's kind of a promise there. During the drought, Elijah became hungry. He's kind of hiding. He became hungry, and God directed him to ask a widow for the last of her flour and oil. Elijah believed that God would take care of her, so he promised her that her jars would not go empty until the end of the drought. He believed that God would do this. So 1 Kings 17, verses 13 through 14. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have." This is the last she had, just a tiny little flour, tiny few drops of oil. He asked her to make bread for him instead of feeding herself and her son, this widow. And he said, "And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." So he's speaking for God here. Elijah has that power and authority to speak for God. And the widow trusted him, and it came to pass exactly as he said. And she had never-ending flour and oil. Well, it ended when the drought ended, but her jars did not empty for those years, 3.5 years. And then, tragically, her son died, and Elijah actually raised her son from the dead. This is in 1 Kings 17, verses 19 through 23. This is after the son died, he said, "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." That is very persistent prayer. It's really incredible, the faith he had. And the boy came back to life. And of course the widow was quite amazed, and she knew that he represented the one true God. The next event, Elijah challenged the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel to prove whose God was the real God. Obviously Yahweh is the real God. This is in 1 Kings 18, 20 through 21. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. So he's going to prove it to them. He's going to prove who the real God was. And he schooled those priests royally. I won't describe exactly what happened, but it's a good read. Again, 1 Kings 18, starting in verse 20. At the end of it, all those false priests were slaughtered. And after this, it was time for the rain to come back. And actually, Elijah just told the king, the rain's going to come back. And then he went to pray. He believed the rain was going to come back. And then he went to pray for it to happen. And I'll read what he said here. 1 Kings 18, verse 41 through 46. And Elisha said to Ahab, "Go eat and drink, for there is sound of a heavy rain." It's a sound that apparently only Elijah can hear. So Ahab went off to eat and drink, but Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel, bent down to the ground, and put his face between his knees. Wow, that's very prostrate. "Go and look toward the sea," he told his servant. And he went up and looked. "There's nothing there," he said. 7 times Elijah said, "Go back." The 7th time the servant reported, "A cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea." So Elijah said, "Go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. There's going to be a ton of rain." It's just a cloud that's the size of a man's hand. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose. A heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. Yeah, that was an amazing event, and the persistence of his prayer. When I pray for things, do I pray in that manner? No, I do not. But this is going to be a theme with Elijah. It's just the power of his faith, the power of his prayer. It's why he's in the Hall of Faith. All right, the next event, after all those priests were slaughtered, Jezebel sought to kill Elijah. So Elijah fled, and he was very scared. He was so scared and discouraged that he even prayed for God to take his life. So he's at a very, very low point. I love that the Bible shows us people in their humanity, people making mistakes, people doubting. Even Elijah, with faith as great as he had, he was terrified. In 1 Kings 19, verse 3-5, it says, Elisha was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. His human frailty is buckling under the magnitude of the situation he's in. And I want to read a longer passage here because it's very powerful. It's in 1 Kings 19, verses 9-18. Like I said, it's a long passage. And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? So he said, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel who have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. He thought he was the only one left. Then God said to him, Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So it was when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, What are you doing here, Elijah? It seems that Elijah's running away from God's will at this point. And he said, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. Word for word what he said before. Then the Lord said to him, Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. There's going to be a new king instead of Ahab. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. Okay, there's going to be a new prophet. Elijah gets to be done. He gets to find a successor. The successor will be Elisha. It shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill. And whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. Yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. There's a remnant. There's 7,000 in Israel that have not bowed to Baal. So he's not alone. Elijah's not alone. God is comforting him, reassuring him. He's not alone. So he goes, he does these things. There's a lot of events that happen in between this one and the next passage I'm going to read. But the last one I'm going to read is where Elijah's taken up into heaven. And this is in 2 Kings 2, verse 6-11. Then Elijah said to him, Stay here, the Lord has sent me to the Jordan. He's talking to Elisha. And Elisha replied, As surely as the Lord lives and you lives, I will not leave you. Elisha doesn't want to separate from Elijah. So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, like Moses, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you? Elisha says, Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit, Elisha replied. You have asked a difficult thing, Elisha said. Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. So Elisha will get a double portion if he sees Elijah when he's taken. Otherwise it will not. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this. So we'll get his double portion. And he cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. The tearing of the garment is when you're in extreme distress. He didn't want to be alone. I guess like Elijah, it's a heavy burden to be the lone prophet. So in a couple of those events, the rain and him reviving that child, the Bible implies that it was only through Elijah's persistent, passionate prayer that the events came about. He was praying in God's will, and he prayed persistently and passionately. Elijah had that Hebrews 11 definition of faith. Confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. All right, and now we're at the end of the Hall of Faith series. So I'll read how Hebrews 11 concludes. Right after the passage I started us with. It's in Hebrews 11, verses 39 through 40. And it's summarizing the whole Hall of Faith. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. That's the conclusion of the Hebrews 11 Hall of Faith. That's all I've got on Elijah, all I have on the Hall of Faith. That was a big one. In the future, I have a couple thoughts. I want to go through the Matthew 5 Beatitudes. I love that passage, and I would love to dig into it a little deeper. And I'll probably also do the Ephesians 6 armor of God. Just go through all those pieces of the armor of God. I think the next video, though, I'm going to cover Romans 11:36. And now for a prayer. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to go through the Hall of Faith, to look at a lot of these Old Testament, just amazing people that exhibited very strong faith. Please help us to use their lives as an example of how we can also have that strong faith in what is not seen, belief in your promises. Lord, I thank you so much for your amazing promises to your people, the covenants. That's another series I might dive into, is those covenants. So thank you, Lord, for those. And please just help us to know your will and to do your will in our lives. Please give us the faith of Elijah, faith of all those in the Hall of Faith. Just pray you would strengthen your people to do your will on earth as it is in heaven. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace always and in every way. The Lord be with you all. See you next time.